Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this Friday look at how Brexit is being presented in the media, I like to take a look at a poll, a turn of phrase by a Telegraph editor, and a story in the BBC News making it clear that Brexit is twice as bad as COVID. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the poll, first of all, because it's quick, Ipsos Mori have published a report which shows that for the first time since we left the EU, Brexit is considered the most important issue for the British public, or that is more of the British public consider it the top issue than any other issue. It's just overtaking concerns over COVID. Now, I'm not going to run a full analysis on this as much as I would like to, hence my using it at the start of this video, because with the action by France, which I'll be talking about in a few hours' time, there's simply going to be too much to talk about next week for me to use an entire slot talking about this poll, which is a bit of a shame because I think it's fairly momentous. It means that there is opportunity in really getting the Brexit debate going now. The interest amongst the public is being increased. Nothing like, it's nothing like a majority considering it the top issue, just more people considering it the top issue than people considering any other issue the top issue. And it's nothing like the level of interest in 2019. But it does look like it's on the increase, and you can't imagine that this trend will be halted anytime soon. So now on to the media. So let's start with the BBC. This is the main one. BBC News story that the Office for Budgetary Responsibility has said that the economic shock of Brexit is twice as bad as that of COVID. Now, this is important because the government have no problems talking up the damage that COVID has caused our economy. The headline news is that COVID has caused an economic shock of 2% of our GDP. Brexit is 4%. Now, if the government wished to downplay both, they could easily try and convince people, but these are small percentages, they don't really mean anything. But because the government are saying, oh no, this is a very serious economic shock from COVID rather, you cannot infer anything other than, well, Brexit is twice as bad, so twice as bad as a really big shock is surely a really, really big shock. Rishi Sunak said that COVID has meant the biggest shock to our economy for 300 years. That's funny, I thought, because that's exactly what economists have been saying about Brexit for some time now. And of course, Sunak is wrong. It might well be that COVID would have been the biggest shock to our economy for 300 years were it not for Brexit. But the OBR has said that the pandemic has caused a hit of 2% of GDP and 4% for Brexit. Now, the 2% of GDP, absolutely huge for a single event, to be sure. But with Brexit resulting in a permanent hit of 4%. Because that's the thing, that keeps going on. And it's entirely consistent with what economists said before we left the EU even. Like, when you consider that we haven't even fully implemented Brexit yet, and that looming trade wars could make it worse still, that 4% is what we consider right now. Could be the tip of the iceberg. Whereas the economic hit from COVID will now be well established, not going to get worse. It may not get better for a little while, but it's not going to get worse. So Brexit is at least twice as bad as COVID, and Brexit has the potential to become even worse. As such, the Chancellor is not correct on any level to describe COVID as the biggest shock to our economy for 300 years. It's not even the biggest shock to our economy since he became Chancellor last year. And what will be important to remember is that Brexit was a political choice. See, COVID happened independently of our government. Yes, having an incompetent populist government meant that we suffered more than most from it, but the pandemic itself was not the government's fault. No blame for Boris Johnson that the pandemic happened. And although a better government would have meant we suffered less economically, we were still going to see a major hit to our economy either way. But Brexit was entirely down to government choices, all of it. It wasn't just worse because of government choices. The government made choices. We didn't have to have any of it. None of it had to happen. And if it hadn't happened, the government and civil service would not have had to split their attention between COVID and Brexit. They could have focused on the real problems facing us and done better. Now, the reason why Sunak has not held back in talking about the economic hit from COVID is that it is a good excuse for his massive tax increases. Because if we have the highest tax burden for 70 years as a result of COVID, how much are we going to have to pay to cope with Brexit then? Because remember, Brexit is going to carry on snookering our GDP every year. That's twice as damaging as far as we can tell at the moment, with the potential for more damage. So the BBC has reported in clear language that Brexit is much worse than COVID economically. But even then, I talk about that language, they apply a light touch. See, towards the end of the article, it talks about the problems caused by our Brexit policies on supply chain issues. It says that we have issued visas for the haulage industry. Fails to mention that of the 5,000 visas we offered, we only got 20 drivers out of it so far. Then it says that the British Poultry Council has said that they will do their best to ensure Christmas is as normal as it can be. But they fail to also mention that they have said that there's nothing they can do to prevent massive shortages in supply now. We are going to be reliant on imports of meat from EU countries, something that will now be much more difficult with a looming trade war with France, if not the wider EU. Though, to be fair, that wasn't known about at the time of publication of this article. But finishing off with a promise from the government that turkeys will be available falls foul, if you'll pardon the pun, of two journalistic imperatives. The first is they should be reporting on what basis the government can make this claim. They should put that claim to scrutiny. The government claim that you will be able to get turkeys as normal this Christmas. If there's nothing to back up that claim, the BBC should have said so. The second is that they should have queried other festive food. All right, talking about turkeys, what about everything else people expect to be able to get? What foods are at risk of being absent from the shelves? What foods are at risk of being available but at higher prices? Will they chase up the government's promises when it's time to deliver? Wording's quite important. And there was a great example of this in a series of tweets from the Telegraph's Europe editor, James Crisp. Now, being fair, he was actually highlighting, just like the BBC, a problem of Brexit. What he said was absolutely right. He noted that the trade deal with New Zealand is going to mean that we'll find ourselves with lots of cheap imports of mussels undercutting our own British mussels. He said that this wouldn't have been such a big deal if we could have carried on selling our produce to other EU countries because there's a ready market for them there. However, because we've been shut out of this major market, that's not possible. But then he said, EU exports became impossible after Brexit took effect on January 1st because the UK was treated as a non-EU country under Brussels public health rules. Treated as a non-EU country. When you say you're being treated as something, it's a form of hyperbole. Like, people will say they're being treated as a second-class citizen when they think they're being treated unfairly to the detriment of themselves. You're not a second-class citizen, you're just using the phrase to describe adversely unfair treatment. But we are not being treated as a non-EU country according to Brussels health regulations. We are a non-EU country. This was picked up on by an academic who pointed out that it should have been phrased that it's because EU exports became impossible because we are a non-EU country. Being treated as something is always subtle language for being treated unfairly. Now, it could be to your benefit or it could be to your detriment. You can be treated unfairly in your favour or not. But that is the power of language. Easy to casually read and think, oh, well, if only Brussels health regulations didn't treat us as a non-EU country, those poor mussel farmers could sell their produce safely enough. Completely bypassing the thought process of, it's really bad that we aren't EU members, or at least members of the single market. Of course, if we were, then we wouldn't be getting that trade deal with New Zealand that means that their farmers get to undercut our farmers in our own market. So even when some of the pro-Brexit media does report the damage of Brexit, you have to watch out for how the language is designed to soften people's attitudes towards the political choice that was made in this country and project at least some of the blame onto the EU. As if the EU somehow tricked us into leaving because we were being so awkward. If they were that good at reverse psychology, they'd have surely been more interested in using it on Hungary. But this again links into that poll. If interest in Brexit is increasing again, then people will be wanting to find more information on what's actually going on. The mainstream media will of course be the first port of call. They'll have to be careful to appear credible. There's no point in denying what people can see with their own eyes. So their use of language will be very careful in order to massage the views that their readers or listeners take away. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.